I'm at home and I see the news and I react, and I think
instantly.
Instantly. And the media has kind of...
So had you seen the video then?
No, I had not seen the video.
You just saw the headline.
I didn't even know, all I saw was shooting at Charlie Kirk event, and the media has kind of painted it as this, I'm celebrating his death or I'm celebrating the shooting. But it's kind of a massive misrepresentation of what happened. And when you see the headline, you said you were shocked when you saw the headline. I can understand that reaction. You see someone celebrating death and you go like, that's quite visceral. But it's again like a massive misrepresentation of like what happened.
Right. I saw a screenshot of it saying Charlie Kirk got shot, let's fucking go. And then an Instagram one which was Charlie Kirk got shot, lol. Yeah,
so the Charlie Kirk got shot, lol was on an Instagram note. I think Charlie Kirk got shot, this one goes on a private story. Okay. And I reacted again poorly. I reacted very quickly. Again, at the time I didn't know anything about the situation, and I retracted and deleted my comments, and then the stories come out a day later talking about I celebrated his death.
What's left back again in the stew. This episode is, well, it's a bit of a mad thing still. We might be getting a bit of trouble with this one. But you know what I'm saying, independent media, man, we just got to do our thing.
Do our own thing.
We just got to do our thing. Today, we're going to be talking about the murder of Charlie Kirk. As many of you know, we had Tilly Middlehurst, also known as Blonde Praxis, on this podcast. It's kind of the thing that started getting people to listen. A month later, Charlie Kirk was murdered in America, doing what had made him famous, debating university students at UVU. As I'm sure many of you who've seen the video, we were shocked, disgusted,
horrified.
It's really concerning, I think, for a lot of people in this political moment that we're in who look to America closely because they're our ally, they're this world's superpower, and think that the kind of growing political violence is really creates an unsafe world. And I think that for us, and I'm not trying to import as a British commentator an American context into our politics, but I look on at a society that really does not sit well with itself, and there was a sense that this unavoidable sense that Charlie Kirk had been murdered for his political beliefs, that because he was a provocateur, because he was this person who had engaged in discourse in this way, that's what they were trying to do, that's what they were trying to shut up. And I think when the salience of political violence rises, when people think that violence is an effective means to be able to make a political argument, that's when politics heads in a really dangerous direction. And so today we've got George Abaraonye on the podcast. Some of you might know George as one of the people who debated Charlie Kirk, but in some ways, George, you've kind of become notorious for your reaction to Charlie Kirk's death. Now, look, we're going to get into all of those things through this podcast today. I think it's really important actually to give you the space to kind of articulate and express and give your side of the story, because a lot has been said about you on social media. You've been retweeted by Elon Musk. You've had your name and face really dragged through the mud of the internet in quite a shocking way. And I don't think people have heard yet your side of the story. Can I ask, just before we get into that, why you chose us to be the first place you've given your interview for?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, firstly, I'd just like to kind of thank you guys for also reaching out to me. I think I chose you guys because I'd obviously seen the interview with Tilly. I'd kind of seen some of the other stuff you guys had done, and I really appreciated the fact that you guys came to me openly, and instead of trying to give a platform to say catch me out or give bad faith interview, you guys are very open that, look, we kind of just want to have a very open conversation about what happened, let you be able to speak to your side of the story and be very fair and hold me to account in a certain degree, but also allow me to be able to explain myself and explain the context surrounding the situation and explain everything that happened. Yes. I really appreciate that.
Of course, man. Of course. Look, we firstly, we believe in free speech, right? And look, I personally found your reaction was quite shocking to me at first, but look, I'll be real, like I've also been a 20-year-old guy, and every single person that I've spoken about to tell them that we're doing this interview in the media world basically said something along the lines of, if all my private views from 20 years old had been in the public eye, you know, it wouldn't look very good on me either. And those are people in positions of power. Those are politicians. Those are media personalities.
And I just think as politics is evidently just becoming more volatile and emotions are becoming more kind of public, and there is just an easier scope by which you can say certain things and then be held kind of accountable in a way that you probably, or anybody would really expect. It is just important, not just in the interest of free speech, but to actually kind of somber some of the conversation that surrounds the environment, the febrile environment that we're in, and kind of demonstrate what democracy I think is all about, which is articulating, communicating, exploring ideas, and trying to centre it in kind of a human aspect of it, where really kind of unhuman and vile things are taking place all around us, and we're just trying to work out kind of what the hell is going on in a very crazed society where it's becoming more unknown, I think, by the day.
So George, take us back. How did you come to be debating Charlie Kirk? Did you make a decision that day that you were going to go and challenge him when he came?
It's actually quite funny. So I'd known that Charlie Kirk was coming, you know, a couple of weeks in advance. Obviously, as part of the committee that term, we help, as a committee, you kind of help build out the term card. You invite speakers. One of the people who I knew was coming was Charlie Kirk. And I'd been talking to a friend of mine, and he'd been egging me on, you know, you have to go debate Charlie Kirk. You have to go debate him. And I was like, why? I don't see a purpose in debating Charlie Kirk. You know, I don't agree with him on many things at all. And I thought that's not someone that, you know, is really going to engage me in productive debate. And so I thought, what's the point? You know, there's no winning in a debate against Charlie Kirk, I thought. And so I thought, you know, I'll go to the event regardless. He's a massive political commentator. I've seen some of his content. I'm curious what he has to say. And, you know, so I was there studying, and much has been said about the attire I wore. I did not plan on debating Charlie Kirk. And
you came in a trackies.
You came in a trackies. I came looking comfy.
The thing is, I know about that though. In Oxford, I think for people who are from kind of a normal background, there is a sense that identity-wise, you want to look. I'm not here to play your game about these you know, old spires and stone walls. Exactly. I'm from a place that's not here.
Exactly.
And so I got why you were dressed like that in a way. And that's part of what offended them, was because I think it is a little bit punk and it's a bit of a middle finger to the institution. And they're like, well, how dare this person not respect, you know, the, I don't know, pomp of the union.
No, definitely, because I find authenticity is key, and I'm not trying to change myself to fit into an institution that wants to dress me up in a certain way. You know, I was there just to enjoy myself, to enjoy the debate, and listening to Charlie Kirk speak and listening to some of the stuff he said, and I disagreed with, and I went, right, like I disagree with this and I disagree with this, and I'm sitting there and I'm stirring. I'm like, should I do it? Should I go and talk to him? Like, should I go and debate him? Is it productive? And I'm hearing other student speakers go up and kind of softball him with questions, or, you know, not really push him on points that I feel like I could really push him on. And I'm like, what's the worst that could happen? You know, like at that point, like, what happens? So what if I get embarrassed a little bit? Like, at least, you know, I had an opportunity to go and do something interesting, talk to someone I disagree with, because I think it's very easy often to, you know, surround yourself in these bubbles of people that you agree with, and then not really engage with anyone else in terms of the views you hold, and like actually have a debate. And so I thought, like, why not, man? And so I put my hand up, obviously, to ask a question. And in a way, it was a really fun experience, you know? I mean, do I think Charlie Kirk engaged in good faith debate? I don't think, you know, much has been said about, I think, the way Charlie Kirk often uses certain debate tactics in order to make certain points.
So go on, what do you mean? Be substantive.
Yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes Charlie Kirk could strawman, or for example, even at certain points in time when I was making certain points, he would go on, you know, kind of tangents to kind of mislead or
deflect.
Deflect or kind of take you away from the substantive points you're trying to make. But I found the challenge of it all quite fun. You know, I had engaged in debate before, but not really in any kind of formalized setting. And so it was really fun for me to kind of engage myself in that way, kind of play that like mental back and forth, and engage in what I did think at the time was quite respectful back and forth debate between him. And, you know, in that moment, I kind of began to understand partly why he did it. I just don't necessarily agree with anything that he said, but, you know, I think in that moment, I really start to see the value in A, engaging with people on platforms, and B, being able to have that respectful debate with people.
Just what you said seems to be an art of debating and politics that has been lost, so much so that we value that in the way that you're talking about, is indicative that the spirit of the debate that he was trying to foster and that you engaged with is kind of becoming few and far between. And that is a bit of an indictment, surely, on the type of societies that we claim to live in, that are kind of free speech, open.
But that was his attack on, that was Kirk's attack on the universities themselves, were that they weren't open to, like, you know, robust adversarial debate and discourse. What I found fascinating about that was that, George, in real time, it sounded to me like you'd been kind of the view that nothing good can come out of a debate with Charlie Kirk. You know, maybe I'm just giving him more kind of cannon fodder to his fans. And then seeing in real time that actually what you had play out before you was the democratic way of doing argumentation, and you were like, actually no, this is an opportunity to firstly stress test my own views, but also maybe try and, like, you know, confront his views. And I think that in the Cambridge stuff, what they did really effectively was, I think they were stronger in argumentation actually than
100%.
the Oxford people going back and forth with Charlie. And I think also, again, like, why did Tilly, like, break out and become this star? It's because she held her own and she made them hold corn. Do you know what I'm saying? So, like, the whole thing of, you know, blunting these people's power is about having to actually meet them where they are. The right have been way more adventurous than the left have been in terms of going into those spaces where they're uncomfortable and having those discussions.
Yeah.
And in all of that, they've set the debate on their terms. Yeah. And I think that's, to a point, what you're kind of getting at is that in his kind of tangents and in his attempt to meander the conversation more towards his kind of ideological worldview, it's to catch people off guard and to entirely set the conversation where he wants it to be, and then further advance his own line of argument.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this is kind of the push and pull that I often have with debate content and debate content online, which is that a lot of it has kind of been engaged, especially early on, by the right. And because of that, they set the debate on their terms. And, you know, you look at, like, say, even Jubilee, for example, and some of the content they produce, and you've got, like, the 1v20 with Mehdi Hassan, and he's debating kind of like
20 fascists,
essentially.
Yeah. And if that autocrat kills you and your family, you're fine with that?
Well, I'm not going to be a part of the group that he kills, because that's the whole thing.
How do you know? Autocrats tend to kill everyone, even their own supporters. Carl Schmitt makes this point very well in his work. It's the friend-enemy distinction, right? You Carl
liberals,
Schmitt, the Nazi theoretician.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't care.
Are you a fan of the Nazis?
I frankly don't care being called a Nazi at all.
I didn't say that. I didn't actually say that. I said, are you a fan of the Nazis?
Well, they persecuted the church a little bit. I'm not a fan of that. But
what about the persecution of the Jews?
Well, I mean, I certainly don't support anyone's human dignity being assaulted. I'm a Catholic.
But you don't condemn Nazi persecution of the Jews?
I think that there was a little bit of persecution and stuff like that, which is bad.
We may have to rename this show because you're a little bit more than a far-right Republican.
Hey, what can I say?
I think you can say, I'm a fascist.
Yeah, I am. Absolutely.
I'm just checking who's clapping, just to get my set of where everyone is on this. Because you know that millions of people are going to be watching you on YouTube and checking out who the fascists and the Nazis are.
I'm not ashamed of that whatsoever.
No, clearly you're not.
The Overton window of debating even has shifted so far right that it's like some of these issues, some of these topics I don't even want to engage in, you know, like people who are...
But I think that's a self-defeating attitude, though. I mean, I do get it. I mean, the principle, like when we were growing up, I think that was the attitude, like, you don't debate a fascist sort of thing. And now what's happened is that...
That was very prevalent when I was at uni.
Exactly. And I think basically what's happened is that the free speech argument was lost by the left because they were trying to find some arbitrary line about where you could, you know, where debate was acceptable and wasn't acceptable. Plus you had this wild west of the internet, so the debate was actually happening. So even though you were trying to shut it down in the institutional sense because you didn't want to give it legitimacy, it was still going on anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something that actually, you know, in that group chat that we'll probably come on to later, this was something that actually was raised. You know, people asked me, why the hell was Charlie Kirk even, you know, invited? We had, you know, Jordan Peterson the term before, Ben Shapiro in my first year. People always ask me, why the hell did you guys even invite these people? And I think I understand. I very much understand the point of not debating fascists, not engaging with fascists, not platforming certain, fringe views that are really harmful and dangerous. But I think with someone like Charlie Kirk, you can't stick your head in the sand. Like, these people don't exist in a vacuum. They have platforms. Like, Charlie Kirk was a massive influence on the US election, and to sit here and pretend like he has no influence, or to sit here and pretend like that man doesn't have impact in the things that he says and some of the policies that he helps push, is foolish. Yeah. And so I think this was a point that, even like you said, in sitting there and listening to him talk, I kind of realized in real time that, like, if people aren't going to engage with these ideas are going to go unchallenged and fester.
Yeah. I would just kind of put it to you then. So we've done a lot on kind of rage bait and
I mean, we're doing this fucking podcast.
Yeah, well, there you go.
I don't think we can escape the rage bait accusations now.
But I feel as though the left has a propensity to throw around these terms, and we've just used them, I think, quite liberally around fascists and fascism and things of that sort. And I mean, Charlie Kirk would identify himself as a Democrat who wanted to inspire conversation, who wanted to enrich the conversation that he, I guess, thought wasn't being had on kind of university campuses. How helpful is it to just call people fascists, the people who we disagree with? Because undoubtedly there are going to be fascists who
like Charlie Kirk.
Charlie Kirk, of course. Sure. And then there will be a whole...
There's plenty who didn't, right? Nick Fuentes didn't like Charlie Kirk.
A whole range of people who are curious by what he has to say, who want to listen to him to kind of further develop their own views, who are right of centre, who may have a whole range of challenges and problems with where they perceive society is going or where it has been. So I put it to you, what do you think of the kind of rage baiting lexis that the left kind of employs sometimes willy-nilly?
It's interesting you describe it as like rage baiting lexis. I think oftentimes, and especially what we're seeing with internet kind of discourse now, is a loss of nuance. People want to find an easy solution or
140 characters.
Yeah, exactly, an easy label to kind of describe a whole group of people that they want to argue against. I think oftentimes, the labels of fascist or even kind of racist to some degrees are kind of thrown around to kind of act as a catchment. And I think they mischaracterize the issue, which is not to say those principles aren't there in some argumentation, that those ideologies don't feed into a foundation of, say, fear that leads people into these circles, that leads people into these pipelines. But I think oftentimes blanket calling someone a fascist because they agree with some policy positions and maybe haven't done research or engaged with other policy positions, I think mischaracterizes the problem, and you don't end up engaging those people in any meaningful way. You just increase the polarization across the internet because now someone's offended that you've called them a fascist, and well, who's going to accept them the right that look to kind of bring anyone into their umbrella, while, I think oftentimes the left can fall into this almost purity checking kind of culture, which I think is another issue to kind of get into eventually.
Your purity check are the ones who say don't platform Charlie Kirk. I think the same thing, like Steve Bannon, I remember being at the Oxford Union, there's like massive protests. And it's like, guys, like, he just masterminded the election of Trump and you don't want to hear what he has to say? You don't want to have to challenge him? Like, this is it's a self-aggrandizement, I think, actually, that, and a bit, it's hubris that makes people think that we don't need to look into this sort of stuff. But I think, as you said, right, like, if you use the word racist to just, label anyone who disagrees with you, I've literally been told by reform people, campaigners, that's a recruitment drive for them. We're helping them recruit by doing that. So this is really not in our interest. And Gary Stevenson actually came out recently basically to kind of challenge the left on this.
I think there is a risk that the left gets very, very angry and starts to be really, really aggressive and accusatory towards people who might be voting for reform. I want to show you a clip which I saw on Politics Joe the other weekend. So let's run it.
Wealth tax or no wealth tax?
It's a very hard one. I mean, I come from a working class town. Everything in kind of reforms policies would maybe leaning more towards no wealth tax.
So for me, if the wealth tax was possible, I'm at a stage in my politics where I would actually support it.
There are a lot of reform voters who'd be supportive of wealth taxes. If you want to get progressive change in the next election, you need to win people over. And I think you need to be really careful to resist the temptation to go around shouting at people, calling them racists. Listen, there are racists in this country. There always have been racists in this country. I totally understand the instinct of people on the left to worry about increasing racism in society. I think it's happening. I can feel it happening. You need to be pragmatic. You need to be sensible. Reform are going to win the next election, and you are not going to stop that by turning around and calling people racists. You need to be relentless and aggressive in your pursuit of common ground and unity. And that means you're willing to go to people who you might not agree with everything about and say, listen, I know we don't agree on everything, but let's find the thing that we do agree on. And let's fight for that. Because those people at those protests, they, just like you, are struggling to pay the rent. Their kids are struggling to pay the rent. They're struggling to find economic futures. If you centre that, if you focus on that, you can build something positive, you can win them over. If you focus on what divides you, all you're going to do is make this country more and more divided.
And I had a comment from one person being like, how dare Gary Stevenson as a white person tell people what racism? I'm going, bro, if I said that, you would be pissed off. Yeah. So don't act like it's about his whiteness. You just don't want to be told that you have to try and empathise with people who disagree with you. That's my view.
I think again, though, with these things, it's a push and pull, because it's difficult to tell. I mean, even me, for example, who's been like a victim of racial abuse on the internet for the past 3 weeks, I think it's difficult to then go and be like, I need to now empathize with the same people who have made death threats against me and my family. Yeah. You know, I think what Gary Stevenson, I think, was trying to get at, which I don't think he quite so eloquently put, is I think the racism necessarily that might be going on, especially in the country right now, when you look at kind of the cultural climate, is separate from the fear. I think the fear triggers the racism instead of the racism triggering the fear, which I think is kind of a misalignment of the way people see that relationship. You know, like, it's hard, especially, you know, as someone who, if you go out and you're working a 9 to 5 or a 9 to 7, and then you come back home, you're tired, you're busy, you've got kids to feed, you've got a family to provide for, and then you go on the internet and you see, you know, from mass media outlets that, you know, immigrants are this and immigrants are that.
In a hotel.
In a hotel, sure. Or even that, you know, all of these kind of misleading stories that paint immigrants or paint people of color in a certain way. And it creates this culture of fear that, you know, people aren't, they're not tackling. Like, the Labour Party is failing in that sense to kind of tackle these issues. And the only people that are trying to speak to those issues, you know, and I disagree with many of the policy platforms, but you cannot deny the effectiveness of the Reform Party in being able to A, stoke that fear, and then B, capitalize on that fear. And I think, you know, when you talk about kind of racism in this country, and you talk about kind of the institutionalized history of it, and you talk about kind of where it's going now, and it's this culture of, I think, fear and constant kind of bashing of different groups, and you go, well, of course they're going to blame these people, because there is no one, you know, the left wing of the UK government isn't out here trying to tackle these narratives. They're not out here trying to say, actually, it's not that immigrants are taking people's jobs, or it's not that immigrants are a danger to people. Instead, they're feeding into the exact same narratives. They're talking about closing down the hotels. They're talking about strengthening the border. And all of these kind of narratives and all of these kind of talking points just become absolutely like storms of fear, and they become storms of almost disinformation and misinformation, where people then start to hold all of these misaligned views and misaligned beliefs that are very difficult to tackle, because once you're in that mindset, your priorities completely shift. You know, you're not. So
in an absence of, it seems like you're calling stating there's an absence of leadership, or of kind of a political leadership that you think needs to steer us out of what we're in.
Absolutely.
Where do people go, given the kind of brazen alternative is reform, and there are new kind of political synergies emerging, but it seems as though you're looking for something possibly a bit more radical in that?
I do think so. I think radical is an interesting way to describe it. I think when you look at someone like Zach Polanski, I think he's a very good example of a new age way to kind of tackle these narratives. Zohran Mamdani as well in the US, I think, is great in terms of making it very, very clear what your policies are, making it very clear the kind of messaging you want to provide, and then being very direct in how you attack. You're not making these kind of, you know, large scale generalizations.
Yeah, he's just a populist though.
Who?
Zach Polanski.
No, I mean he describes himself as an eco-populist,
he's a populist, yeah.
But I think that's about grabbing media attention. When you hear about the way he talks about the environment, when you hear the way he talks about class politics, like he has some very clear kind of policy ideas, and I think Zoran is probably a better example of this in terms of like with his state-sponsored supermarkets and stuff like this. Like he has very clear kind of solutions to certain problems, and he stays laser focused on them. And I think, you know, from an institutional level, I think that's one way to tackle it. I think when you look at the people, I think a lot of it will start to come from community building. I think kind of one thing I've kind of learned throughout kind of my time in university is the power of a community, of people being able to come together, actually have discussions, because I think a lot of the time as well, you know, in this climate of fear, people aren't coming together, you know, like people are scared to go outside because of Union Jack flags, and because people aren't able to engage each other in the pubs or at the parks, people aren't able to empathize as easily, people aren't able to even, you know, in a low stakes environment, engage with debate or engage in a topic. I mean, like, it's kind of crazy that one of the only places where I can really go and test myself in a debate is on a national stage debating Charlie Kirk. There aren't many other spaces that kind of give you the platform or the framework to be able to even debate or engage with other ideas. I think, you know, it will come from a shifting culture that is less about finding a reaction and more about finding a solution. I think it will come from a shift in people, you know, taking a more active role in the politics that they seek to put forward, taking a more active role in community organizing or community projects or helping out those in need. And I think that's something that takes time, but I think that's something that also, like, cultural leaders, you know, pop culture, celebrities, as well as politicians also have to take full force in terms of being able to push, because I don't think it just comes from the government, especially when you look at how disillusioned some people are with these broad institutions, and you look and you see the influence of influencers and celebrities in the political climate, and you go, well, these are the people that also are going to make change.
Let's go back, because we've spoken about some big issues here, and we can sink our teeth into them. But I think it's important that we kind of still track what happened. So post Kirk debate, I imagine you become a little bit of a local celebrity. Yeah. People know you as the guy who debated Charlie Kirk, etc., etc. You, as I understand the story, is you've at the last moment kind of decide to run to be president of the Oxford Union. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'd say I put my hat into the ring pretty late.
So what was that? What was the decision making process there?
Yeah, I think kind of I'd spent a lot of time around the union. I'd seen.
That's interesting to me as well, because the union in my head was, and we've spoken about this before on the podcast, it's a bit of like a, I don't know, it's quite shallow as an institution, and a lot of people see it as a vehicle to them becoming like a politician or a journalist or whatever, and we know about those kind of like well-trodden paths and stuff. So what was your attraction to the union as well?
So I didn't know about the union before I came to Oxford. I kind of got here, and you know, the union is the biggest society in Oxford, and so you get there and you hear a lot of buzz from students immediately. You know, it kind of has a reputation amongst the student populace. You know, you hear so many different things, so many different massive characters, and obviously just as well the huge array of speakers everywhere. I mean, Tom Hanks came like in my first term. That was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And so you kind of hear all of this about the union and you get intrigued. And for me, I mean, even the reason why I applied to Oxford in the first place, my teachers told me that, you know, like you're bright, you could go to Oxford. That means something to the people around you. That means something to the community. When you go, people back home in school will look at you and go, that could be me one day. And so I went, okay, bet, like I hear that. And then I got to the union, and the union, especially again amongst the student, has this very kind of like, there's an assumption of the kind of people that might succeed in the union, or like a way of acting within the union, a way of moving in the union. And I thought, well, I mean, this is a really cool space, firstly, like where regardless of the reputation, that world-class speakers come, you get to engage in debate. This is a society that turns over £1 million in revenue yearly, and it's completely student-run. That is like insane to me. I'd never heard of anything like that. And I wanted to be involved. And then I got more involved. You know, I was convinced to run by a good friend of mine who ended up becoming president. And in seeing kind of the environment, I went, well, I want to be able to move through this environment with authenticity. I like to think that if I'm genuine and if I'm true to myself, you know, I can succeed in a place like that. I backed myself. I thought, if if a space like the Oxford Union, which, you know, is historically this paragon of almost like British politics and British journalism, if I can move through that space and navigate that space in a way that I feel is authentic to me, then who's to say I can't go and do that in British politics, or who's to say I can't go do that in a corporate environment, you know? Kind of, again, wanted to stress test myself. And so I got involved. I started running with various different people. I thought, you know, these people share in the same kind of ideas of wanting to shift the culture of the union away from some of the toxicity, away from some of the imagery that the union has been steeped in. And
what is that toxicity?
I think oftentimes elections can be, you know, people want to win, and I think oftentimes you can see people get very emotionally invested in things, and oftentimes people can, you know, end up feeling slighted or feeling pained by elections, which is understandable. You know, they're competitive. Everyone wants to win.
Popularity contest.
Oh, to a degree, yeah. And I think,
and some knives get sharpened.
In a way, in a sense, yeah. Right. And I think sometimes, you know, people aren't able to engage in good-natured competition. And for me, who's someone who's always moved through that space, I've always wanted to engage in that good-natured competition. You know, I've never quite understood why things need to be such that they are. And so that's kind of something I've always tried to push, and especially with others, is something I've always tried to push, is aiming to detoxify the union, aiming to make it as safe a space as possible, aiming to make it as culturally inclusive as possible, aiming to talk about as many different things and topics as possible within the union, and, you know, within that, then open it up to the student community even more, because I think it's such a melting pot right now of different political ideologies, different groups, different cultures, which I find so fascinating, and I want to only expand that further.
Did you want your left-wing politics to be more represented in the union?
I don't think so, no. I think oftentimes, actually, what's quite interesting in the union is, especially when people run, the political faction, the political ideologies kind of aren't necessarily what people run on, you know? I mean, it's not to say it doesn't have impact. It's not to say that, you know, your political leanings don't affect to some degree the way you move through the union. But like, I have never run in the union on a leftist platform, or vote for me because because I'm a leftist, or whatever.
Like food controls.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. That's never really been it. I think my politics might inform some of the other kind of ideas I have for the union in terms of wanting to say make it more inclusive.
But what do you mean by inclusive though? Like which debates are not being included by the union, or which people aren't being included?
Well, say for example, I started an event last year in the union called Say It With Chess, which was a partnership with the African and Caribbean Society, which was very much centered around having a space to have discussions that are primarily focused on the African and Caribbean community, that are primarily focused in the Black community in Oxford as well, and talking specifically about topics and identity and issues within the Black communities across university, for example, which is something that didn't really exist in the union before then.
So do you think Black people don't feel comfortable in the union?
I wouldn't say that. I think the union has historically been...
hosted Malcolm X back in the day.
It did. You know, and that man's a massive idol of mine and a big inspiration to me. I think, you know, the union has historically been an institution that is populated by, you know, certain groups of people. I think.
Go on, call them out. You don't want to get in trouble.
Nah, I'll do it
for you. It's posh, middle class, Combe Counties, private school people. It is. I'm sorry, it's just a fact. I mean, people who've basically been told that the world is theirs to a certain degree in terms of like go out and get it and do whatever you want, and then they see the union as an institution where they can raise their personal profile, and that's what they go and do. So that's why I wasn't into it when I was at uni.
And I think when you look at kind of the way demographics are changing in Oxford, and you look at kind of the increase in, you know, people of colour at Oxford, you know, I think the union is moving in that direction of becoming a lot more inclusive of those people, a lot more inclusive of those spaces. And I think part of that shift is about, especially me as a Black person who felt like I could succeed in union, being a visual marker of someone who moves through that space in a way that is in a way that is authentic to me, which is again kind of going back to like in the trackies, like.
And even for people who have been through the kind of university system, I still found it quite inspiring that you could be yourself. I mean, I recount some of my experiences, and I would have felt I would have to compromise an aspect of myself in order to fit in to something like that. And I guess seeing you just being yourself was quite inspiring, having been through that system years ago.
So can you give me a little bit of background about where you're from? So it sounded like the school that you went to, not many people went to Oxbridge. So you're from Chelsea, is that right?
From Fulham, yeah.
From Fulham, okay. Right. So Southwest boy.
Yeah.
So like, give me a sense of your like community where you're from.
Yeah. I mean, so it's a very kind of multicultural community. I went to a state school in Chelsea, which is also a very, again, vibrant multicultural school. But again, we don't have the highest number of kind of follow-ons to Oxbridge. I think in my year group, I was the only person in my year to go to Oxford, and we had 2 in my year that went to Cambridge, which, is good.
That's better than most state
It's
comps.
good. Yeah. It's good, but again, I wouldn't say it's a factory of people that go to Oxbridge.
No, sure.
And so, in going to that school and being in that space, I was kind of told, you're someone that could do things. You're someone that's bright. You should use that. You should be able to put on for your people. You should, use the opportunities that you might be able to access, and to go and try and make something of yourself, so that people can look back and go, this is something I could do as well. And that's something that's always really stuck with me.
You then go to, you run, you get elected. So that must be like the back end of last year. Yeah. Okay. So the summer happens. Look, I was on holiday actually the week that Kirk was murdered. Talk me through that day for you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm at home and I see the news and I react, and I think
instantly.
Yeah, instantly. And the media has kind of...
So had you seen the video then?
No, I had not seen the video.
You just saw the headline?
I didn't even know, all I saw was shooting at Charlie Kirk event, and the media has kind of painted it as this, I'm celebrating his death, or I'm celebrating the shooting. But it's kind of a massive misrepresentation of what happened. And when you see the headline, you said you were shocked when you saw the headline. I can understand that reaction. You see someone celebrating death and you go, like, that's quite visceral. But it's, again, like a massive misrepresentation of like what happened.
Right. I saw a screenshot of it saying Charlie Kirk got shot, let's fucking go. And then an Instagram one which was Charlie Kirk got shot, lol. Yeah,
so the Charlie Kirk got shot, lol was on an Instagram note. I think Charlie Kirk got shot, this one goes on a private story. Okay. And I reacted again poorly. I reacted very quickly. Again, at the time I didn't know anything about the situation, and I retracted and deleted my comments, and then the stories come out a day later talking about I celebrated his death, and I'm like, well, hold on.
And you didn't know he was dead?
At this point I had no clue.
And you hadn't watched the video.
Yeah, exactly. And
do you think if you'd watched the video you wouldn't have said that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, again, when we talk about that group chat, and I think one thing that's kind of lost in all this is like a lot of other students were also doxed in that group chat, which is like kind of horrible, and they've had to go through some horrible things as well. And like, it's a group chat that was being used to talk about many different political issues, like many different political discussions. Like I said earlier, we'd even talked about the idea of whether or not to platform Charlie Kirk. And this is a group chat where a lot of discussion happens, and we talk about many different things. We talk about the efficacy or the ethical nature of debating someone like Charlie Kirk. And I was advocating for challenging these people, challenging their views that I disagree with, one of which being gun reform. This is a man that at various different points has said that, gun deaths were a prudent deal or a necessary sacrifice to be made for the right to bear arms. Exactly. Yeah. Which, that man's 30, that man was 31, I'm 20. As a 20-year-old, to hear someone talk about life in such a callous nature was difficult, I mean, people have died. Like, there have been 314 mass shootings in America this year alone. Like, 390 people have died, thousands are injured, and these are mostly children. These are people with families, people with lives. And, someone like Charlie Kirk, who goes on these platforms and says these things, and you think this is someone that would never be, would never have to deal with these kind of issues. This is someone who he goes around universities with an ensemble security team. You would have never thought that he would have been a victim of it, and then he is, and the immediate reaction was one of like immediately like, oh my God, like shocked, like what the hell happened? And, you know, in this group chat where we're talking about various different things, and I go, Charlie Kirk got shot, lol. And it's an immediate, like, visceral reaction, and it's not even me celebrating, you know, like.
Did you say, so you didn't say let's fucking go? Was that not, that's not real, that screenshot?
No. So this was part of a different, like, this was like kind of when I reacted kind of on various different like platforms, I kind of went into the group chat, said it, and then on my private story again, kind of heated a moment, you're not really thinking things through very much, and you kind of react instantly. Yes,
you've said a throwaway comment.
Exactly, and I think
the thing is, I'm not trying to do this to like catch you out. I just think like this is what people have seen, right?
Absolutely,
I would look like a chump if I didn't bring it up. I can understand as a 20-year-old guy saying something fucking stupid, sometimes performatively in a group chat. Obviously, people don't know you. People see you as this person who's president-elect of this massive institution. People see you as the person who debated him. So it's like, whoa, like, how is that somebody's instant reaction to it? And I think what's going on here is a little bit like there's been so much desensitization that as a generation that we've gone through, that someone getting shot is not like, for some people, and I think especially for younger guys, I do think like there's a little bit of like, you learn more empathy the older you get. You realize more about like the kind of importance and the weight of certain actions and certain stuff like that. And I accept as well, you hadn't seen the video, and I don't think you would have reacted that way.
No, definitely not.
You know, judging you as the person that I'm seeing before me today, that you would have reacted like that. But there is a sense of like that callousness in politics that really concerns people, and really concerns me about when we see escalating political violence.
And the callousness that I guess was embodied to a point in the message that was sent around, but then the subsequent callousness around you, which was kind of, you're the president-elect of the Oxford Union with dreads and with trackies on, and a whole kind of barrage of abuse that was sent your way. And I guess you've had, to a point, a chance to articulate how this kind of timeline of events came about. But there seems to be, to a point, a kind of a nuance in how all of these things intermingle and play with each other. And how would you have been met with the same hostilities were you someone else? And I mean, that is...
that's the counterfactual. I think that does rest on some people's mind. I mean, what do you think? Do you think you would have been treated differently if you weren't a black guy with dreads from Fulham?
I mean, I think it's a topic that, especially whenever I talk to friends and I talk to family, it's something that is always kind of brought up, is this idea that, you know, part of the reaction is because of the way I look, it's the way I present, and kind of going forward, it's something, you know, you're aware of, but I guess you almost don't realize just how serious it can be until kind of it hits you. And, you know, like when certain comments or certain things you say are taken out of context, it's very hard to kind of close that bottle up again. And I think, you know, you're seeing a lot of kind of different misconceptions now about who I am. I think you're even seeing people clip up parts of speeches I made in which kind of they're trying to paint me out as this kind of violent person.
Violent revolutionary.
To effectively create change in the world we desire. And side prop will argue that at times there is simply nothing else that can be required other than violent retaliation. And this is a view I wholeheartedly agree with. The view that some institutions are too broken, too regressive, too oppressive to be reformed. Like cancers of our society, they must and they should be taken down by any means necessary.
And then quite literally 20 seconds later in that same speech, I go on to then advocate for peaceful protest in saying that
sometimes violent protests plant the seeds of their own demise. Revolutions may overthrow oppressive regimes, but what follows? History has shown us that extremism in the pursuit of justice often stumbles after its apparent triumph. A battle won, but the war often lost. A victory undermined by the chaos that comes next. See, this house believes moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. Yes, I argue tonight that moderation is not just a virtue, it's a strategy, a necessity, and the key to sustainable change.
I think the problem with that specific speech was that it was really unclear in the way that you said your argument, what you stood for. So that clip stood out. I felt like you confused the words slightly.
Again, this is the problem when you kind of when you can take things out of context so clearly. In the full context of what I said, I think it was quite clear, actually, my view, which was that, you know, at the end of the day, peaceful protest, I do think, is the most productive way to kind of go about making institutional change, at least currently in the world we live in. And I think again, when you're able to take words out of context, they lose their meaning. And if you took the context out of, something that everyone said at a certain time, anyone could find themselves in this situation. I think
I think the graciousness to a point has been lost of what the union and what debating is about, which is to develop your ideas, and they won't always be coherent and astute in the way that you would aspire for them to be.
Yeah, because you're 20 years older.
Exactly.
No,
exactly.
I think Tim Stanley defended you in the Telegraph on that point.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think that has been lost in all of it. I mean, I would argue it's kind of become a bit too serious, the kind of debating chamber of Oxford. And I understand the kind of the credence of it all and its place within kind of British culture and history. But at the end of the day, it is a student union designed to foster debate, discussion.
Yeah, I get it. I do. But I also see the other side of it. Like, it's Oxford. It's like one of the biggest exports of this country. Oxbridge it's kind of like part of how our national image is on the world stage. There's a famous story about Hitler reading about the 1930s, a motion that Oxford students wouldn't fight for king and country, and thinking that means that they were ready to attack. So of course it has this steeped history of political importance, and it's where a lot of politicians cut their teeth. So I do see the other side of that ledger. I think one of the problems, George, was that in the aftermath of it, when you apologised, you qualified your apology. And I think for a lot of people, if you say, I'm sorry, but, it doesn't sound like an apology, right? And it sounded like you doubled down. Could you explain a little bit more what you wanted to get across with that statement, and do you feel like that was misinterpreted to any degree?
I mean, I think one thing that's kind of lost in all of this, especially in the news stories that, don't misrepresent the situation, is that, again, my comments were retracted and deleted immediately after seeing the video, which was horrific. And also, I had then apologized on my social medias to the people that kind of had seen that, and I talked about the need for empathy in our politics in our discussion. And I think when giving the qualified apology, I'm very much coming at it from a point of not only do I want people to obviously see that I'm remorseful for the comments I made and for the way people interpreted them and understood them, but also that reaction comes in a context. It doesn't come in a vacuum. The reaction comes as a result of the political climate with which Charlie Kirk, spoke in, the political climate with which Charlie Kirk stoked. And, this is someone that, had various different views that, again, don't exist in a vacuum. Some of the kind of rhetoric which was espoused could be very harmful. I mean, he said in a Jubilee debate that black people were better under the Jim Crow era, when black people were being lynched in America. Like, we were subjugated to some of the harshest discrimination that's been seen in the world.
Blacks in America did not have the same rights they had today. They were less murderous. There was less break-ins. Why is that?
So I'm sorry, are you trying to say that blacks thrive under subjugation?
No, I'm not. I'm saying I'm asking you the question. The data shows they were actually better in the 1940s. It was bad. It was evil. But what happened? Something changed. They committed less crimes.
Maybe they were afraid. I mean, 4,000 black men, women, and children were killed in violent lynch mobs.
That's your explanation. But
racial terror permeated American culture for hundreds of years.
Black America is worse than it has been
that affected
in the last 80 years.
The generational psyche of an entire group of people?
Well, I'm sure it did. I'm not discounting that. I'm just trying to understand, why is it the more social welfare we've done, so we've spent $20 trillion on uplifting black communities, $20 trillion, and black Americans are poor. We've done everything that's been asked.
That context doesn't just disappear. And, my comments, again, they were rash and they were ill-considered, but...
They weren't considered.
They were ill-considered.
They're ill-considered.
They were ill-considered.
Yeah.
But they don't exist in a vacuum, and I think that has kind of been lost on all of this.
So do you think that some people will hear that as you saying, to a certain extent, Charlie Kirk bears responsibility for his own death?
I'm not saying he bears responsibility, but... Well, I'm not saying he bears responsibility. But as a political commentator, it's not that you it's not that you deserve what you get. That's not what I'm saying at all. But when you speak into a political climate, when the way in which we talk about politics, as you're saying, is becoming desensitized, is becoming more polarized, it leads to...
It can be inflaming.
Exactly. Like, it can be inflaming. It can be difficult to tease apart individual influences. It can be difficult to tease apart why exactly someone has done something. And you look at the overall environment and you go, well, people aren't willing to engage with each other. People are spreading these kind of ideologies, or they're spreading these kind of points of thinking that subjugate certain people, that, you know, call for the non-existence of others, and that's difficult for a lot of people to deal with. And I think, again, I'm not saying violence is the way to kind of go about acting out those frustrations. I think there are much more engaged and much more healthy ways to do that. But I think this is, I guess, especially post-death, something that everyone in the political commentary space needs to, I guess, start to consider is the messaging, and B, what exactly is the end product of that messaging? Like, is that messaging something that could then be used to justify doing really, really hateful things? Because I think that's something that we should then be considering, why exactly we're putting out that messaging.
Yeah, I think that there's an element of the kind of leftist discourse that wants to make an argument along the lines of, and I saw Sean Ramiz say this, who is a TikToker, but this idea that the chickens came home to roost for Charlie Kirk. I think that there's something quite unnerving about that narrative. Whilst, look, I completely accept that there's been some revisionism on who Charlie Kirk was. You know, Charlie Kirk bussed people to the Capitol insurrection. You know, he said, I haven't seen that specific clip, but I'll take your word for it. But, you know, there's plenty of things, you know, this idea that women, you know, shouldn't have jobs, etc. I think it's ludicrous, but they were all things that ultimately Kirk was saying out loud, and you literally could physically go to him and make your case in the opposite direction. Yeah. And I think the concern that I have is that whilst you can hold on the one hand that Charlie Kirk was involved in some coarsening of political discourse in America, I'm really, really nervous about the idea that, like, we kind of stoop to that level to a certain degree. And I think that you have to always think that anytime someone looks like they've been killed for their beliefs, that's an assault on all of us. That's an attack on all of us who believe in democratic norms. And that's not to say that, you know, rhetoric and political discourse hasn't changed in a really unnerving and kind of concerning way in America. I think it has, and I think we're importing some of that over here. But I think we still need to be really kind of robust in calling that out.
And a level of kind of cautiousness, because to me, in some senses, it could be read that what you're advocating is permitting that even to happen on a different side, which, as you've said, Freddie, I mean, I'm not saying that's what you said, but I think it can be read into as such.
But they're definitely reading that's their argument.
Well, that
right?
would be
that's what they're saying.
And as you said, the kind of coarsening of kind of political discourse is an affront to all of us. But not only is it an affront to all of us, it completely erodes the integrity of a democracy going forward. And as we lurch into kind of an unknown kind of territory around how democracies traverse this weird new world that I think we're on the cusp of, the inflammation of conversation and debate and discussion is possibly only going to become
more inflamed.
More inflamed.
And I think, just to add to that, right, I think, you know, we've just seen a terrorist attack at a synagogue this week. And then, you know, the day, this is obviously like a very controversial thing, but like the day, I think that evening, right, there was pro-Palestine protests in the UK. I personally think that those were ill-judged, in my view, because we need to lower the temperature of discourse, right? And at the moment, what I'm seeing is that every identity in this country, pretty literally every identity, feels that they are the victim of some form of subjugation, oppression on the other side. The Jewish community, if you saw the clip of David Lammy giving his speech outside the synagogue.
You have blood in your hands! You're all guilty of the whole. You have allowed Jew hatred in Manchester on the street. You have allowed it. You are all guilty. We do not want you speaking here today. You do not want you speaking. Shame on you. Shame on you.
They were attacking him, saying that you were responsible for this by allowing those marches, right? On the other side of those marches, those people are saying, "Well, you're allowing this," and then you see then you see a burning attack at a mosque, which is absolutely heinous. The thing that everyone, when we make a call for unity in the face of stuff like that, no one wants to hear it, which to me talks to a febrile environment that actually should be alarming all of us. And also, what is it? And you made this point earlier about the communications environment being radicalizing to a certain degree, right? But if that is the case, then we really need to be even more upfront about how we turn that dial down, in my view.
I mean, you touched upon it a bit earlier, this kind of grievance politics, at least that's how I read it to be. And for all of the kind of identitarian woes and challenges that I think the country are in, and they're not just kind of the trivial kind of wokish leftist identitarianism, but the deep-seated sense of people who are not accommodated by government in any way, be it for their ethnicity and their race or their class or whatever it may be. To me, it seems, and not to be too Marxian about it, but we're in an economic crisis which is fueling some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And so
that's that fear to racism.
Yeah, exactly.
Model, yeah.
And the underpinning aspect of it is the fact that as a country, we are struggling with the reality that people are getting poorer, and the promises of meritocracy and social democracy no longer manifest for most people. What do you say? I mean, is that a fair observation?
We're not asking you to solve that, by the way.
No. Yeah.
You still haven't finished your degree. But,
in 5 years' time you can.
But do you see? I think what I'm trying to. I think what we're both trying to say is that there's one side that I think we are. I can see your point of view, but on the other side, I think in a way, what you had come in was the reality crashed at your door about how much that you are actually by being president-elect of the union, you're actually someone with some political capital in this country.
No, absolutely. I think, 20-year-old, you don't think what you're going to say will ever reach national news. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's a very apt kind of analysis of things happening in the country. Like I said, talked about a lot of fear, and a lot of that fear is stoked by uncertainty around, like you said, cost of living, around kind of the future. Like it's harder to go to university. It's harder to buy a home. Life is more expensive. Like, these things weigh on people's minds. And like you said, like when all of these things are more difficult, and then you go on the news, you read in the papers and you see people trying to score political points by blaming, and you go online on the internet and you see more and more people just angrily engaging with each other. It becomes very difficult to, again, parse apart what is true, what is not, parse apart what is almost productive and what is not. And you end up with a lot of people who, again, are just scared and trying to protect themselves, and as a result fall into a lot of these kind of really harmful ideas, I think, that oftentimes are used to kind of turn people against each other.
And you saw, I guess, the really sharp end of that afterwards. You're getting retweeted by Elon Musk. You've got essentially the former prime minister calling for you to be expelled from university. Really crazy levels of of online scrutiny. I mean, the highest you could probably possibly argue in the world level of scrutiny.
Yeah.
I mean, how has that affected you?
I mean, it was insane. Like, the first couple of days especially, was so difficult. I mean, it's kind of, you're not really a public figure, and then all of a sudden I've got every news...
You're a hated figure.
I'm hated, and every news channel under the sun is talking about me, calling for my head. I had people hurling abuse at me. People turned up at my parents' shop. They were shouting at my parents. I had, a journalist in America call for me to be shot, saying that it would be worth the 50-year jail sentence. And it's like, exactly. And you read all of these things, and it's so difficult to sit here and take that, on the chin. I was low-key scared to leave the house for days on end. And you're kind of, it was really difficult. It was really difficult. I won't lie. And in all of this, I'm trying to take things day by day, and like, I'm obviously, you know, you learn, you grow from that experience, and I'm just like, you know, I don't want this to be the end of me. Like, I want to be like, I had big aspirations of wanting to improve the world around me. Like, I went to Oxford not just because it's Oxford, but like I said, because I want to part of my community, because I want to be the change that I hope to see in the world. And a lot of not just the hate and the death threats and everything, but like, almost, I felt like I was mourning that loss of opportunity to be able to go and now make something of myself and improve the world around me. And I think that was very difficult. And I think in coming to Oxford and then trying to get back on that horse and trying to kind of do work and start to kind of help mend and amend things, has kind of helped put me back into a better mindset of, look, at the end of the day, like, you're still 20, and, you know, if every 20-year-old ever was blasted on international news, you know, I don't think anyone would make it. But this is a learning opportunity at the end of the day, you know, in the same way anyone who says something dumb on a group chat and then gets held accountable by their friends, I'm going to take it in the same way, you know, and develop some tough skin. And, you know, this might even be an experience that I'm able to then use to then go and more effectively make the change I want to see, more effectively engage in those debates, more effectively be able to help people in a way that is productive instead of being part of this kind of ecosystem of hate and fear and engagement.
You had a similar experience, didn't you, during the Clacton?
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to that and I could completely empathise, because, I mean, we've all said stupid things, which I think is the guarantee of this conversation.
We've all made mistakes, bro.
I mean, trivial throwaway comments, before you know it, get exacerbated, and in the face of quite abrasive opposition, things can get brought up and things are obviously miscommunicated, and you find yourself defending things that were so far from the intention of what you were trying to articulate. And yeah, I mean, I had my experiences. I mean, I commented on a friend's post years ago about, she said something about drinking white men's tears, and I put it being my favorite drink. It was, I mean, exactly. It's so ridiculous.
Do you apologise now?
Well, of course. I mean, it's.
So I'm gonna tell you off later as well.
I mean, it's a stupid comment. It has no kind of validity in anything, and it was a throwaway thing that I don't even remember saying it.
Look, I think people need to have better grace for hearing people be accountable. You've been accountable. You've had your name, like, the harshest kind of reputational dragging that you possibly could go through.
At the start of your
life, you haven't even finished your degree yet. I think you're learning the lessons of it, and it will make you stronger. I think Definitely. Even this conversation, I think we're kind of challenging some of your politics and making you think about this sort of stuff. But that's part of it, bro. Like, when I was 20, there was not a chance in hell I would have been doing this. My views have changed so much over the last year, let alone the last 5 years, right? So the idea that this is the end for you, that's bullshit. And, you know, I think going back to, like, and this, you know, Charlie Kirk made this point a lot, which is what people liked about him, was this idea that, like, the substance and the content of what you say and your character is ultimately what determines your success. So, you know, you are not in a position to like give up on yourself, right? Like, you are constantly working on yourself and improving. And I think as a society, you know, not to like get too philosophical, but like the punitive justice system isn't just about punishing people. That's the punitive bit. It's also about reformation and restoration or whatever. You know, you made a social transgression. It's not illegal what you said. It wasn't unlawful, you know, and you've had social consequences as a result, and you're going to grow and improve as a result of it. I think that's part of, like, a society is meant to enable that. I think in some ways, actually, it was so harsh, some aspects of it, that kind of shows the teeth that are being bared by society right now.
And I guess there's a moral obligation, I think, on all of us to accept your words in the spirit that I think you've articulated them to us, and just have a comprehension. I think as a society we have to recognize that the internet is changing how we communicate with ourselves, like our historical selves and our future selves and ourselves today. And if we're so dogmatic about it, then no one's going to get anywhere, and people won't have the scope to do all of the brilliant things that you aspire to do. And it only undermines, I think, the institutions that we uphold to be valid within a democracy, surely.
No, exactly. I think it's difficult, I think, obviously, in this landscape, especially as people who want to do good, you know, to have one mistake or one kind of thing that you say be an indictment for the rest of your life. You know, I also don't think it's even particularly productive. I think oftentimes you'll find that same kind of indictment and leads people into certain kind of pipelines and platforms that end up almost flipping them entirely on their head. And it's like,
you think people get red pilled by basically being cancelled?
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, it's definitely something that happens sometimes. I wouldn't say, you know, that's the only way things happen, but I think it's one part of internet discussion. It's one part of internet discourse that we have to be quite clear about. You know, like cancel culture isn't productive. You know, it doesn't help people really move on or learn from an issue. If anything, most people who get cancelled only become more entrenched in the problematic views that they were cancelled for. And so when we look at kind of cancel culture, you know, like historically the left has been characterized as the ones weaponizing cancel culture, and now you look and it's the right who are weaponizing it. It's been an insane heel turn that now suddenly, because they're in power, they want to defend certain viewpoints. They want to kind of stifle.
Now words really do matter.
Exactly. Now suddenly you can't say certain things. I mean, you know, people have a very strong reaction to the way my words were misinterpreted, but there are websites and organizations in America that are getting people fired from jobs, not even for doing anything as close to what I did, but simply for quoting things that Charlie Kirk has said, or simply talking about the fact that this is a man that held divisive views, which is insane to me. Like, that is not productive. That is not healthy. That's not how you engage in debate. It's not how you engage in discussion. And again, like I said, that's not something that's going to help someone flip and suddenly start to be like, oh yeah, no, I see your perspective. What? No, that's just going to entrench them further in their views. They're going to go, these people clearly don't care about me. These people are only out to get me, and thus let me retreat further into what I know. And I think like this cancel culture that we're seeing online, you know, which has become much more prevalent post Charlie Kirk's death, I think is worrying. It's worrying for the principles of free speech. It's worrying for internet discourse in general. And I think like it's something that I think we all need to begin to tackle and engage with, and look and go, there are more productive ways to deal with this. There are surely more productive ways to have a conversation or to disagree with someone than to immediately go and nuclear and try and ruin someone's life.
Yeah, but that's what people want to do, don't they? I mean, they want to there to be as significant as consequences as possible.
And they, want to reclaim a sense of authority over your words. I mean, as much as it's a conversation around free speech, or whether it is a conversation around free speech, I think more fundamental to that, it's a conversation around the exercising of power and what can be said and who can or can't say it.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they've spent so long complaining about and saying that we need to be absolutist about free speech, and now it's just been a complete turn to saying like, no, actually language can incite violence. It's like, what the fuck were you lot saying? For like,
what's your thing? Free speech for me.
Me speech, not free speech, right? Yeah, free speech for me but not for thee. And there's Timothy Snyder's got a really good little post about this on his Substack, which is worth a read. But essentially we've got to a point where you know, discourse is really being shaped by like online communication realities, right? So like if something works for their base, I'm talking like MAGA or the right, the populist right here, they're happy to just kind of like give into that, whatever that is. So that anything's a problem, it's like, okay, no, let's have a completely open discussion, say whatever the fuck we want. But if we're all in agreement here that this person should be deplatformed, then of course objectively they should be deplatformed, right? I mean, what's the crack with the union, bro? So like, are the union going to deplatform you? Or what's going on?
The union going to deplatform me? I mean, given ongoing proceedings, there are obviously certain things I can't talk about because, you know, you don't want to unduly influence processes. But, you know, there have been many calls on both sides. You know, some have called for my resignation. Many have called for me to stay. You know, there's been large scale support statements that have come out. And at the end of the day, I'm at the behest of the membership. You know, I I want to stay in post. I want to be able to deliver. I want to be able to use that platform not just to atone and to make good on, you know, the kind of things we've talked about today, but again, to begin to engage in that debate, engage in that discussion, be able to steer conversation in a way that I think is really helpful. And, you know, if the membership want to see me continue to do that, then I would love to continue to do that. And
would you be gutted if it meant you couldn't carry on? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Like, you know, I worked hard to be in that place. It means something to a lot of people, I think, as well, just to see someone who looks different, who speaks differently, who is willing to present themselves differently in that place. And I think it would be a massive loss for me, for a lot of people, to kind of see that capitulation to this kind of online pressure, see that capitulation to what has been a lot of abuse held at me, and abuse held at an institution that has historically stood for free speech. I mean, it's funny actually, you brought up the king and country debate, which, you know, was a monumental part of union history in 1933 when they voted that they wouldn't fight for king and country. And, you know, it was like a massive media scandal at the time. The again, right-wing media, the institutions were like, how dare these people? You know, Winston Churchill's son actually came to, he was at Oxford at the time, he tried to have the debate expunged from our minute book. Someone tried to rip the pages out of the minute book. It was insane drama. And they hold like a massive referendum about whether or not this should be a part of union history going forward, whether or not we should expunge it from our minute book. And the members voted overwhelmingly in favor of keeping it in the minute book, you know? Like, someone once told me the union succeeds not in spite of its controversies, but because of its controversies. It's a bastion of free speech, as it likes to, you know, advertise itself, and I think it should uphold that, you know?
Yeah, I think it should. I mean, I'm not like, no offense, but I was never like a lover of the unions. But like, I think it's the reason why the unions keep coming up in like political discourse is because basically most of the media class went to Oxbridge, and those who didn't go want to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Want to have a
but I think it still has. I mean, despite what I said earlier, it does have a relevance in
sure.
kind of future of the country as well as its history, and it is a special place, and it should inspire provocation, interest, ambition.
Absolutely.
And I think that's manifest in you. Would you still be rocking up in your tracksuits?
I mean, I can't be rocking up on debate days with my tracksuits, but you guys will see me around Oxford still bopping about.
Right. I think what's also interesting is that if they were to remove you, it would be such a flagrant politicization of what had happened that in some ways you could argue is counter to the union spirit, because, you know, free speech is about, you know, you say what you want regardless of fear or favor, right? So as long what you said, whilst we've made it clear you disagree with it, we disagree with it, most people do, is not unlawful, right? It's like you're able to express that even if people don't like that opinion. I just feel like it would be so self-defeating for this place like bastion of free speech to then deplatform you over that after you've shown contrition, qualified your views, etc.
Yeah, and I think, you know, since being back in Oxford, the one thing I've told almost anyone who's talked to me about it or asked me about it or has kind of brought it up is that, look, I'm willing to talk about this. Like, this is something I'm willing to engage in. You know, I'm not trying to hide away from this issue. It's why I'm here. Like, you know, and I think somewhere like the union is the best place to be able to have those conversations, you know, to challenge me on my view, help me learn as well as we challenge each other, and ultimately come to a resolution. So, you know, I very much would like to stay in post. I very much would like to follow through.
Look, I mean, let's broaden out. Okay, we've spoken a lot about Oxford, what happened. I mean, we've spoken about political violence as well and some of the concerns we have. I do think that society is in a bit of a powder keg right now, and it's kind of like, it looks like it's ready to explode to a certain degree. And there are people who are willing this on, and I don't want to be seen as a show is also saying like, this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like, what do you think we can do now to lower temperature in political discourse?
I mean, firstly, do you accept that politics is febrile and society is? I mean, you've spoken about it, but do you actually think it is, or is this just a kind of hysterical period we're in where obviously people are passionate, but it's not as bad as maybe
it's not that deep.
Yeah, exactly.
I vehemently disagree with this. Not that deep camp. I do think everything is that deep. And I think, especially given the death, I think this might be an inflamed period. But I also think that inflammation doesn't come again out of nowhere. Political tensions are rising globally. You're seeing, large-scale movements on the political spectrum. You're seeing the Overton window in America shift to the right. You're seeing the Overton window in the UK shift to the right. In Europe, you're seeing various different kind of political movements. Like, tensions are rising. That's undeniable. How to kind of bring that temperature back down is a difficult question. I think it starts with having conversations. I think being able to give people platforms to have conversations. I think B, it comes with, education as well, prioritizing education. I think like one thing in America you're seeing, which is really concerning, is like the departments of educations are being defunded. You're seeing books being banned across libraries. I think that's really scary in terms of, people need to be able to engage with literature, to be able to engage with different ideas. And when that opportunity is taken away from people, well, of course, they're not able to engage with a variety of different ideas. Of course, they're not able to engage with a variety of different perspectives because they've not been taught to. I think prioritizing less of a reactionary culture, less of a culture that is, steered by clicks or views or engagement farming, and more about, again, reaching a resolution or reaching a solution to a problem, I think is key. I'm not going to purport to kind of have all the solutions, right. But, it's like I said, I do kind of a lot of different community and society stuff in Oxford, and a lot of what I've been trying to do there is about having interesting discussions and having interesting conversations. Like even last year, it's funny you talked about Red Pill. I actually held a panel on the manosphere and Red Pill content, and kind of learned a lot about myself and learned a lot about that sphere in that. And one thing that I think came out of that conversation that was really prevalent is the need for community, that a lot of people fall into these kind of issues because there is no community around them. There's no community of people to take care of them or to catch them before kind of you start to kind of fall into these hateful kind of spirals. And I personally think a large part of that is bringing back community centers, bringing back third spaces, being able to fund those spaces so that people can, talk to different people. Like I grew up in the youth club, and that was a great space for me to be able to talk to so many different people who don't just look like me, who don't just come from the same place as I do, but, come from completely different perspectives, have different views. And I think it's been a large part of why I'm so community oriented. And I think that shift towards the community is key in terms of being able to bring back people together, bring together conversations.
So you like Labour's £5 billion to regenerate high streets? Have you seen that?
I have seen that, actually. I think high streets are a big part of it. I also think, again, like those community spaces, like bring back art spaces, bring back funding for the youth clubs, bring back sports.
And even pubs. I mean, I just think...
Even the pubs, exactly.
Yeah, bruv. You can't afford a pint these days,
I mean,
man.
I think pubs are a huge... Or what's happened to pubs is a huge scandal, because as much as it's about the pub, it's everybody, it's the public house, it's everybody's sitting room. You can go in there and talk about anything.
I grew up in the pub.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're in the youth club.
Man I was on a pint, bro.
I remember I was talking with someone and they're saying we need to repoliticize the pubs, and I was like, exactly. Like pubs are hubs of community, in the same way, in London, I guess the youth clubs are those hubs of communities. When you go into more rural areas, it's the pubs, you've got like 15, 16-year-olds chilling in the pubs. And I think they've become almost depoliticized spaces when they could be used to do so much more. These are spaces that are open, centralized, that everyone knows about, that could be used to do community projects. They could be used to do art projects, or used for spaces for children to come like during lunchtime or after school, stuff like that. That, I think there are ways to be so much more creative about the way in which we build and tailor and engage our communities. And I think when we start to do that, you'll start to see kind of the empathy grow. You'll start to see kind of like just that human interaction that is so beautiful. I think it's a large part of why I love London so much. Is like the multiculturalism, all the different communities that blend together. And I think, that isn't something that just has to be inherent to London. That is something that can exist across the UK. All you have to do is foster that. All you have to do is work actively towards building that?
Well, I just think that we don't even have to reimagine some of those institutions. They've existed long in the history of this country, and I think that's how we have been quite a moderate, stable country, is because the Civic Forum has long been a siteful conversation, be it the pub, be it the youth club, be it the PTA or the Women's Institute or whatever it may be. And this decline in kind of volunteerism, but decline in the civic space or the pub or whatever it may be, is socially corrosive.
Yeah, absolutely. It atomizes us more and more. I think it's interesting you brought up multiculturalism there, because I think multiculturalism's on the line at the next election. And I think it's worth reflecting on why that is, because your state comp in London still got 3 people into Oxbridge. And I think people in London find this difficult to understand, but actually to be poor in London is kind of the best place to be poor in the entire UK. It's got loads of social, cultural capital. Obviously, it's a huge city. Rich people, Chelsea, rich by poor, side by side, right? Whereas some of these other communities in other parts of the country,
like where I grew up,
right, had a homogeneity. I'm not saying this as being like I'm pro like monoculture or whatever, but there was a sense of like the community spirit was upheld despite the fact that it was economically sliding backwards. So if you listen to these kind of right-wing agitators who are like ethno-nationalists, what they're saying is that people have come into these places and now they've lost that, and they're blaming it solely on like the complexion of that community because they've got a few immigrants now there, when really obviously the story is actually about social and cultural and financial failure. So I think there's something's got to happen where everyone in whatever community they're in across their country needs to see it as responsible on them to go and volunteer and pick up litter and whatever, regardless of your backgrounds, you know.
And as much as that's true, there needs to be a recodifying as to what the value system that we're all trying to work towards are. There are so many people who subscribe to a different version of Britain and what it is to be British and its subsequent values and cultures as a consequence, that as much as I see that to be true, you can still kind of get disparate aims of what people are working towards. So there needs to be a national conversation, and I think there needs to be an ongoing national conversation throughout our lifetimes as to what is the country that we aspire to be, that we are, that we want to be, and what are the methods that we facilitate that. One thing that I'm personally quite shocked and saddened by is the fact that Labour came in at such a volatile time. Last summer, obviously very febrile. This summer, very hot and very divided. And yet in all of that, there hasn't emerged a kind of social cohesion policy.
The integration policy.
An integration policy.
But integration's hard, man.
It is hard, but you have to have the aspiration to do it. And I do almost find it quite scandalous that, given that, as you said, multiculturalism is on the line at the next election, but it's on the line, I think, right now, on a daily basis, that the government fails to have the courage to recognise that people are having deep-seated opinions about it, and we need to have a course corrective on what social cohesion looks like.
Yeah, there's been erosion of trust, I think. I think the immigration problem in particular has been quite like that for those rural seats that are on the right, has been the way in which they've been able to articulate that project for themselves. You know, in hindsight, I think we should have lowered the salience on immigration and just fixed the problems instead of just talking about it and not fixing them.
But the distrust hasn't come just on the part of the public to politicians. I think politicians are deeply distrustful of the public and the collective ability to make...
The public can also be very, very unfair.
I just disagree. I don't know. I disagree. I think it's an instinct on the part of British people, irrespective of your background, of fairness.
I hear you.
So, and I think people have a deep sense of all of that. But what is the kind of rallying cry for fairness? So I think as much as the public are distrustful of politicians, I do think that the political class are deeply distrustful of... not to revisit conversations from half a decade ago, but it culminated in Brexit and all of that kind of stuff. Was actually, these people can't make a decision and we will stifle it at any opportunity we can, and only fuel then a distrust amongst politics and people.
I think it's interesting you characterize it distrust. I would almost call it a misunderstanding. Like, I think definitely there's distrust from the public towards the government. I think that's always existed. You know, it comes about in the way kind of our democracies formed as, you know, particularly aristocratic institutions in their history, and have kind of developed onwards from that, you know. But it's interesting that you talk about distrust from politicians to public. I think that distrust almost comes from just a misunderstanding of how to engage with people. Like, I think it's almost clearer in America, and I think the UK seems to be falling into the same problems. Like when the Democrats talk about why they lost their election, and they talk about, you know, Kamala was talking about, oh, she couldn't pick Pete Buttigieg because he's gay. That's not why you lost the election. You lost the election because your policy platforms were not clear, because you couldn't engage with certain parts of the Democrat voter base. It's the same thing in the UK. The Labour Party are floundering, and they're looking at why we're falling in the polls, and they're going, oh, it's because we're not dealing with immigration hard enough, and we're not dealing with the borders. No, it's because you've come in as a Labour majority, and you've seemed to abandon all semblance of a left-wing party. You seem to have abandoned all semblance of what a historical Labour Party looks like. And that comes from a misunderstanding of the needs of the public. That comes from a misunderstanding of the wants of the public. And
also how class has been curated in this country, and people still have a historical attachment to their area. That's why we talk about deindustrialized areas, because they were once industrialized areas. And so I think you're right, as to a point the party divorces itself from its own political heritage and how and why it emerged, there's going to be no kind of vision for the future until you reclaim some of that.
Yeah, but I'd push back on that, because the deindustrialized community, that the former working class base of this country, we've slid way to the left of them on social politics. And those people are heavily concerned about immigration. So in their view, I'm just going to give the party establishment view, right? You need to reconnect with those people, which means understanding what their concerns are, right? And that's why that they've gone hard on this immigration stuff, is because the voters that we won last time to be able to give us a supermajority were Tory switchers. So they voted Tory in 2019. Those people now are voting for reform.
But again, I think that comes from misunderstanding the problem, because again, when you look at those working class communities, a lot of their feelings around immigration, again, like I say, come from that fear of what they read in the media. It comes from constantly engaging with the immigration discussion, but from the lens of reform, from the setting of Brexit, of like from the idea, like the inherent idea that immigration is inherently bad or inherently a problem, or that unmitigated immigration, or, you know, is bad and we can't control immigration. You know, when you let the Reform Party or the right frame the conversation, the left are never going to win the conversation, because it's being framed in a way that is designed for them to lose it.
It is ahistorical, I think, what you're saying. I mean, I grew up in one of these areas, deindustrialized towns, that had always voted Labour. And yet they were accepting, of course there were challenges, but they were accepting of migrant populations from all around the world. And there has been a level of harmoniousness amongst different demographics of people for a significant period of time. So to concede that multiculturalism has failed because now the dominant narrative is around immigration and a more hostile rhetoric around people and race and all these types of things, but to overlook the fact that many communities from industrialized and deindustrialized communities have been unwelcoming to those people and hostile, I think is just so false. And the Labour Party has a particular characteristic to try and integrate its kind of socialist, social democratic thinking and an emergent kind of immigration narrative that informs, I think, to a point, a centre-left project.
I'm not defending the rhetoric at all. I'm
but I think there's policy. I understand, mindset. But I think there's almost an oversimplification and a caricature of people in parts of the UK, when, of course, they've had concerns, and to a point they've been exacerbated by politicians. But to lean into kind of prejudicial supposed instincts, I think is quite wrong, and it does a disservice to what the project of a Labour Party government is to do, which is greater prosperity and uplift for everyone, including those communities.
But it's not about being prejudicial, right? My view is that the future is of the country who learns to integrate as many new people because of we can't argue with the demographics, right? We've got an aging population. The country that learns to integrate new people into its population while still retaining a sense of itself,
culture and heritage and history.
That is the future belongs to that country for developed economies, right? So that should be where our message is. I think the thing is that the numbers were just too high under Boris Johnson, right, and under the Tories post Brexit, and you have to attend to that problem. You can't. What you can't do is say that because there's 100% salience of all the negative stories, like when a migrant does X or Y fucked up thing. What you can't do is always just say, well, we don't want to look at that, or don't want to talk about that, or whatever. And this is the thing where I think we're kind of all in agreement, but I think we're all kind of, our emphases are in different places. What the government should have done, in my view, and hindsight's 2020, right, is just say that we're going to try and create a prosperous Britain for anyone who wants to come and contribute to this society, and people who give in, get out. And that's what we're all about. And I think they've been trying to make that argument, but it's just not cut through. And then within that story, what you should be saying is that the way to be a country of immigration is to have control. If you have control and people think there's a sense of fairness, we can make sure that people are coming in and being integrated, etc., common language, common culture, etc. What the image that people currently have because of small boats, etc., is that the government doesn't have control, and that is being refracted into their personal lives because everything is slid. And on the final point, I just want to add on that front, It was a view of, in the New Deal, right, that we have to lower immigration in America, 1930s America, because of deflationary wages. You can keep on undercutting the labour market if you bring in people who, for them, that's loads of money to make, right? And that is part of the problem that we've had in this country post-Blair, was an acceptance that we can just keep on undercutting, and we've gutted the unions, and that is a significant fucking challenge for the government to uphold. So I'm not saying that I'm pro everything that's happening. I am,
but there has to be a common vision that surrounds all of this stuff.
Exactly.
And I think where there has been an absence of a social cohesive policy or an effort to do so. I mean, I don't think this country's had any social cohesive policy since 2010. And the fact that we're
big society.
Now 14, coming up to 18 months of a Labour government, and there hasn't really been anything substantive to suggest that this is what Britain stands for now, and we want to have control, and the government does have control of this, and we can arrange our apparatus in the view of a certain kind of vision and future, is a huge problem, because you've already conceded the ground, but it's harder to get a tract on it when it just becomes escalating further and further, and the goalpost changes as what it is to be British.
Absolutely, because I think, like you said, with the goalposts will consistently shift. I mean, I'm born in Britain, grew up in London, but what are great British values? Great British values are constantly changing. They're the whims of the great British public. In 10, 15 years, I might not be someone that upholds great British values. And I think constantly conceding to the right on these conversations of immigration, constantly conceding only shifts the goalposts further and further. It only shifts the goalposts in a way where people, you can never satisfy everyone on immigration. But I think what you can do is you can provide infrastructure. You can provide more legalized routes, legalized routes that are easier for people, so that you don't have to have people being smuggled in on dinghies. I don't think the solution to immigration is making it harder to immigrate. I think the solution is almost having more legalized routes with more planned infrastructure for people who then come here, who are then able to do work in ways that don't undercut people with these large scale systems or workplace kind of initiatives that can kind of bring people in. And obviously, I'm speaking in very kind of loose terms and generalizations, because I'm only 20. I don't have the policy set out, but I don't think the solution here is shutting people out. I think it's about being able to integrate them effectively. And when you are able to integrate them effectively, you can see, with the Windrush generation, they came here, there was some level of infrastructure and work set up for those people. There were communities that were able to be built because there was space and it was affordable. And you've seen how the Caribbean culture has become such an integrated part of UK culture. I don't think a lot of people would suddenly tell, apart from
all my junglists are white dreads now.
Exactly. And I think that's a major part of UK history, and that's something I think should continue to be a part of UK history. I think it's about integration and doing that in a productive way, instead of trying to engage people in conversations around why they shouldn't be here.
Yeah. I think this just control narrative is really central, and I think my major concern is that the current infrastructure the current way the discourse is going, you know, the Tories at their conference basically announced that they're going to copy Trump's playbook, which gives carte blanche to Reform to do the same, which they probably were doing anyway, right? Yeah. But we need to really get a handle on two things. Number one, the right start with immigration. Their coalition begins by pressing the immigration button and getting the racists to come in, the non-racists to come in, putting the non-racists at the front of their movement, so that's the face of it. And then they bring people in from that place. What the left needs to do is choose their topic that the right don't have an answer to, because look, we had Aaron Bastani on the podcast and none of us could come up with a good answer to asylum hotels, right? So that's why the right keep pressing the immigration button, because they know it's going to be a problem. The left should focus on the inequality problem. Absolutely. Right? We should build our coalition from the inequality problem, but that doesn't mean that you can still at the same time kind of turn your nose up and disregard the immigration problem. The inequality problem, if you could attend to it properly, you know, I don't have the answers either. We need to figure this out through the podcast, but you know, if you can get people to feel a sense of that control is returning to their life, I think immigration would be less of an issue for them personally. But at the same time, we should make sure that that control narrative is being reinforced by trying to get a better handle on that system.
And control isn't the only kind of endpoint. It's a sense of agency. Yeah. It's the fact that people do have control, but they can determine their own lives. And one of the significant handles that politics or politicians have completely lost is the sense of agency, especially turning to this asylum seeker conversation. Is it's not just that people don't have a sense of control, or that the government doesn't have a sense of control. It's people have no agency of the fact that people are coming into their communities and people can't say anything about it. And if the left, and this has always been a project of the left, is agency of the working classes, agency of people to determine their own affairs and have some control over that. And until that kind of key facet, and I think it is a value system that can't be attached to ideology, that can't be really entrenched outside of almost a sense of individual liberty, until the left gets a grip with that, because that is how the history of this country has emerged, through a sense of individual agency. Until it's integrated as part of a leftist kind of program, you can have all the control you want, but if people feel as though their lives actually aren't getting better because they want to do something, but there is still control, the conversation will only continue to rear its head, and potentially in more ugly fashions as the future kind of unfolds.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think I kind of completely agree with your framing of inequality needing to be at the centre of it, because I think when the left begins to frame inequality and then tackle inequality effectively, the salience of immigration doesn't become as much of an issue. You know, when people are fed, when people have stable jobs, when people can afford to live, I think they care much less about the fact that, you know, the news is telling you that the immigrants are taking people's jobs. Well, whose jobs are they taking? Because my job is safe. But when you can't tackle the rising inequality in the country, when you can't tackle the rising cost of living, all of these fears, you know, you can't then, it's very difficult to go and rebut someone when they say, you know, oh, the immigrants are taking my jobs. And you go, well, no, they're not. And you go, well, yeah, because I'm unemployed and I can't get a job. And then I look at the people. Exactly. And it's difficult to tell someone who's struggling, who's in that mindset that, no, you're wrong, or that, you know, you need to look at it from this other perspective, you know. And even if you do tell them that, that's a very lengthy and kind of involved discussion that, you know, you can't really do on a national scale. So I think a large part of this is about tackling inequality, because once you begin to tackle that inequality, once you begin to tackle that fear, that the issues of cost of living, you then immediately, like, the salience of issues becomes completely shifted. You know, people aren't necessarily worried about the existential crisis of the UK. They're not necessarily worried about the existential crisis of their communities, because they're fed, they're happy, they're enjoying life, and they're able to, as a result, accept more, be tolerant of more, celebrate all of these different things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Mexico is actually quite a good case study on this. If they've actually kind of pared back the state whilst also trying to focus on inequality and getting money into people's pockets, and also going after, you know, corruption, the blob, etc. They're kind of quite a heterodox case worth looking at. Yeah, George, we've kind of gone all over the shot. All over the shot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, of course.
Thank you so much for coming on. I mean, I guess the last thing is to kind of say to you, you know, is there something that, like a message that you want to kind of get out there before this goes bad in the world, you're rearing your, you're putting your face back out there again. Is there something that you want to leave with people to tell you about who the real you is?
Yeah, just that I think, I think in times like this, we all should just lead with empathy. I think it's obviously very easy to say, and I think, even in the mistakes I've made, I'm learning that I need to lead with empathy. But I think it's key in kind of how we deal with these issues. It's key in how we build our communities. It's key in how we interact with each other, and as someone who wants to one day go and make change in the world, and I want to see the friends of mine be able to also go and make change in the world, and I want to be able to foster a better life for me, for people around me, for people who look like me, for people who don't even look like me. I think we all need to A, lead with empathy, B, give each other all a bit of grace, and C, be just more willing to work together, I think, to kind of reach these goals. And I want to be able to continue to do that. And I would hope that, despite making a mistake, that I am still given the opportunity to do that, because it's something I would love to do. And I would hope that, I'm able to do that going forward.
Respect. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
I appreciate you guys having me.
No, that was so enlightening, and I think it's brought the tone to almost where it needs to be in this whole kind of discourse where people are just very emotional. So
let me. I was going to end it there, but this is the masculinity we should be. That we're about. That's what we're about. People make mistakes and people can grow and change, and I think we have to believe in that, because ultimately, we're all works in progress.
No, literally.
Respect.
I appreciate you guys.